A midnight call, a shattered clue, and a mystery that refuses to stay buried. Step into the shadows as danger creeps closer with every breath. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Nero Wolfe and the attack that broke all his rules. The scream hit the telephone line before the dial tone finished dying, and for a second I thought some radio drama had bled into the wiring and chosen our number for rehearsal. But no radio actress ever packed that kind of raw panic. This one scraped straight down my spine like a bottle opener. I'd been at my desk doing a passable imitation of a man organising case notes when the phone jolted the air. By the time I lifted the receiver, the scream was already becoming a gasp. "Wolfe!" the woman choked out, each syllable fighting its way through whatever nightmare she was inside. Then came a crash, metal on pavement or skull on brick or something you don't hear twice in one life, and a muffled cry like someone's last breath being folded shut. The line went dead so fast it might have been ashamed of itself. I stared at the receiver long enough to feel foolish. I rang the operator, got the trace, Midtown payphone, 48th and Trent, and scribbled it down. Then I hung it up, grabbed my jacket, and headed for the door to the plant rooms. Wolfe had forbidden interruptions during orchid hours, but there's only so much a man can forbid when a dying woman demands your attention. I jabbed the elevator button. Somewhere above, the motor groaned awake with the enthusiasm of an old cat being asked to perform. When it arrived, Wolfe stood inside, arms folded across his chest like a judge waiting to pass sentence. "Archie?" His voice was low and sharp, like a steel ruler tapping wood. I instructed. "Yeah, I know," I said. "But when a woman screams your name into the phone before getting knocked into next week, I figure orchids can wait." His eyes, already narrowed, pinched even tighter. Wolfe never liked being contradicted, especially when he suspected I was right. "Explain," he demanded. I did, word for word. When I finished, he exhaled, slow, long, and heavy enough to lower the room's air pressure. That sigh was Wolfe's version of sprinting down Fifth Avenue waving his arms. "Phooey," he muttered. "Take me to the office." That was rule break number 1. Wolfe descending early from the plant rooms was as common as a walrus doing ballet and twice as awkward to watch. But he followed me, and when we reached the office, he took his chair like a man arranging himself for battle. "Trace the call," he ordered. "I already did," I said, dropping into my own chair. "Operator says it came from a Midtown payphone, corner of 48th and Trent, right next to that fancy art-dealing club you hate, the one with the velvet drapes and the clientele that dines on imported arrogance." He grunted. "The Baudin Club." "That's the one. They've been hosting under-the-table auctions lately, rare Eastern antiques, private collectors with deep pockets and shallow ethics." Wolfe's eyes flicked toward the ceiling, which for him was the equivalent of snarling. "The trade invites calamity." "Yeah," I said. "Well, calamity seems to have invited itself." He reached for the bell cord and gave it a flick. Fritz appeared in the doorway, silent as a Swiss wind chime. "Beer," Wolfe said. "It's afternoon, sir," Fritz replied with his usual serenity. "Good. Bring Mr. Goodwin a ginger ale." "Thanks," I said, "but make it coffee, I'll need it." While Fritz left to fetch refreshments, Wolfe turned to the phone and dialed a number using one thick finger at a time, as if punishing the dial for existing. He hung up after 30 seconds, irritated. "No answer," he said. "Saul Panzer must be occupied." "His answering service will take the message," Wolfe added sharply. "Occupied," I said, "or sleeping. Even operatives need beauty rest." Wolfe levelled a glare at me. "Archie, your levity is ill-timed." "Sure, but it beats screaming into a payphone." That was when Fritz returned with the beer and coffee. Wolfe accepted his glass with the reverence of a priest receiving communion, then took a long drink. After setting it down, he said, "Call Saul again." Before I could, the phone rang. Our phone this time, not some midnight death whisperer. I answered. "Goodwin." "Archie," said Saul Panzer, calm as a man announcing the weather. "I got your message. I'm at 48th and Trent. There's blood near the booth." "Blood?" "Fresh," he said. 2 droplets. And a scrap of embroidered silk. Looks expensive. Could be torn from a scarf." "Any body?" "No," Saul replied. "But the scene's wrong. Whoever attacked her didn't want attention. Nearest witness says someone ran off toward Lexington." "Stay put," I told him. "We're sending company." Wolfe had been listening. "Well?" "Blood, silk, and a witness," I said. "And Saul's there." Then call Inspector Kramer. I raised my eyebrows. Wolfe volunteering to summon Kramer was like the Statue of Liberty offering to tap dance. Not impossible, just suspicious. You sure? I asked. He frowned. Archie, do I appear jovial? All right, I said, and dialed Kramer. Kramer answered on the second ring. Homicide, Kramer. Evening, Inspector, I said. You busy? Goodwin, he growled. I saw that Gazette tease. Something about a mystery call tied to your boss. Tell me it's trash. I can't, I said. We just got a call from a woman who sounded like she was dying. There was a pause, then, where? I gave him the address. I'm en route, he said. Tell Wolfe not to get in my way. He's sitting, I said, so you're safe. After I hung up, Wolfe closed his eyes, fingertips pressed together like he was communing with the spirits of logic. Archie, he said, prepare yourself. This will be unpleasant. That's why the city invented overcoats. At 10:52 the bell rang. I went to answer because Fritz never does. Kramer shoved past me with Stebbins behind him, both smelling like cold air and cigar smoke. Wolfe, Kramer said, not bothering with hello. You taking cases by telephone scream now? Wolfe opened one eye. Inspector, we received a call, that is all. Stebbins glared at me like I'd personally murdered the city budget. Panzer says there's silk on the ground. Embroidery, I corrected. Classy touch. Shut up, Goodwin, Stebbins barked. Wolfe lifted a hand. Mr. Stebbins, you will mind your tone. Mr. Goodwin is my agent. You may be a bulldog, but he is not your bone. Kramer sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Fine. Just tell me, did the woman identify herself? No, Wolfe said. Only my name. Hell, Kramer muttered. This is going to be a circus. It already is, I said. Lon Cohen splashed the call across the Gazette. Says an unidentified woman cried for help from Nero Wolfe. Kramer groaned. Tell Cohen if he prints one more line without confirmation, I'll subpoena his typewriter. You'll have to fight him for it, I said. He keeps 3. Kramer ignored me, turning back to Wolfe. You know you'll need to cooperate. I know no such thing, Wolfe cut in. I will act within the law, nothing more. Kramer clenched his jaw. All right. Wolfe, I'll wait for your report. Don't make me regret the courtesy. That was as polite as he ever got. He left Stebbins to glower at me a final time, then they were out the door. Wolfe inhaled deeply. Archie, he said, we have been summoned. Against my will, we shall respond. He rose, not quickly, but with the deliberate weight of a verdict being delivered, and pointed to the papers on my desk. Type a memo, he ordered. Title it, The Call That Shouldn't Reach Us. I opened the typewriter, rolled in a sheet, and started tapping. And as the keys struck, I had the uneasy feeling that the night had only just begun warming up for trouble. The morning began with a knock so polite it practically apologized to the doorframe, which meant only one thing. Whoever stood outside wasn't a bill collector, a cop, or a client with enough nerve to demand a refund. I'd barely set down my coffee when the sound drifted through the brownstone's quiet like a timid afterthought. Considering the night we'd had, a midnight scream, a deadline, and Wolfe breaking orchid hours, I wasn't in the mood for delicate visitors. It was 9:15 a.m., which meant Wolfe was in the plant rooms, and not to be disturbed unless the building collapsed or someone had invented a new variety of beer that bloomed in direct sunlight. I went to the door, and there stood a fellow who looked like he'd slept in his suit, but tried to pretend he hadn't. Thin, polished, and vibrating with nervous energy, he clutched a leather portfolio like it was the last lifeboat off a sinking ship. Goodwin? He asked. That depends, I said. Are you selling encyclopedias or confessing a crime? I only buy the latter before noon. He swallowed, straightened his tie, and managed. I'm Daniel Rusk from the Montclair Museum. Oh, good, I said. An art man. Wolfe loves art men. They always bring money or trouble, sometimes both. He blinked at me, clearly unsure whether I was joking. I let him stew and waved him inside before his suit finished melting. In the office, he took one look at the empty chair behind Wolfe's desk and went pale. I was told Mr. Wolfe would be available. He is, I said. Available is not the same as accessible. He's upstairs committing orchid diplomacy. If your business can wait, he'll descend at 11. Rusk shook his head so fast his hair tried to escape its part. It can't wait. Please, this is about Lila Harrow. That name snapped my attention like a mousetrap. I gestured to the red chair by my desk. Sit, talk. He sat, but couldn't stay still. His fingers kept worrying the edge of his portfolio, and he glanced at the stairs every 10 seconds as if expecting Wolfe to appear in a cloud of theoretical smoke. Lila Harrow, he repeated, as though saying her name might summon courage. She may have called here last night. May have, I said. She definitely called. Whether she lived to regret the decision is another matter. He winced. Then it was her. Identify the voice? I asked. Yes. He rubbed his temples. We worked together. She sounded terrified. That matches our official assessment. I leaned back. Care to tell me why she was screaming Wolfe's name into a phone booth before someone shut her up? He hesitated, and that hesitation had guilt dripping off it. I'm not certain. Try again, I suggested. Clients who don't show up are tricky to bill. Clients who lie are worse. He flushed. Mr. Goodwin, I'm not lying. I'm simply trying to be careful. Lila obtained an artifact recently. A dagger. A ritual piece stolen from a monastery during the war. Ivory inlay, Eastern origin, priceless to the wrong people. So, she was in the fencing business, I said. No, she was a private broker. She had connections, she handled delicate transfers. This piece, it frightened her. And she came to Wolfe. Yes, yesterday afternoon. She asked his assistance but refused to explain the danger until she could prove it all, she said. She promised to return at midnight. Well, I muttered, she kept her appointment, just not in person. Rusk sagged, folding in on himself like wet parchment. I was afraid of that. I checked the clock. 10 minutes past orchid hours. Wolfe would be free from his hothouse kingdom in less than an hour, but something told me this wasn't going to wait. I picked up the house phone and pressed the plant room extension. Wolfe answered with his usual charm. Archie, this better be the fire department. It's Daniel Rusk, I said. He says last night's caller was Lila Harrow. He's sitting in your office sweating on your upholstery. Wolfe growled. Bring him up. That was Wolfe's version of this is serious. I escorted Rusk to the elevator. The ride up was silent except for Rusk's rapid breathing. When the doors opened, Wolfe sat in his custom-built chair among the orchids, glaring like I'd interrupted a romance. Mr. Rusk, Wolfe said, his tone the warm equivalent of a tax form. State your purpose. Rusk tried to talk, his tongue tangled. Wolfe lifted a hand. Clarity, sir. I will not abide dithering before lunch. Rusk inhaled deeply. Miss Harrow possessed a ceremonial dagger stolen from the Monastery of Two Serpents during the conflict. Several parties wanted it. Dangerous parties. Names, Wolfe said. Victor Baudreau, a collector with an unfortunate reputation. Tamsin Vale, Lila's former partner. They had a falling out. And Jonas Quill, an art columnist with connections to illicit dealers. Wolfe's expression did not change, but I saw the flicker. Art world politics, his least favourite circus. And your role? Wolfe asked. Rusk hesitated. Wolfe narrowed his eyes. Sir, if you equivocate, I will end this interview. I authenticated the dagger, Rusk blurted. Illegally, for a buyer I cannot name. There it is, I said. The smell of guilt, strong as museum varnish. Wolfe shot me a look but didn't disagree. Before Wolfe could press further, the extension on the plant room wall rang. I answered. Homicide. Kramer, came the gravel. Inspector, you calling to exchange recipes? Goodwin, Kramer snapped. We pulled a woman from the East River, no ID yet. Clothing fits the description of your midnight soprano. I felt Rusk stiffen beside me. Wolfe watched me, reading everything in my face. Kramer continued, voice low. Tell Wolfe we'll need cooperation on this one. I relayed the news to Wolfe. He nodded once. Tell him, Wolfe said, that I have already begun considering the matter. I repeated that to Kramer. There was a grunt. All right, Wolfe, I'll wait for your report. Kramer hung up. Wolfe stared at Rusk a long moment. You withheld information, he said quietly. I cannot abide deception. Mislead me again and I withdraw. Rusk swallowed. Understood. Wolfe glanced at me. Archie, take the gentleman downstairs. Collect a retainer. Rusk fumbled for his checkbook. I escorted him out, thinking that for a man who arrived frantic, he'd just succeeded in making our day a whole lot more interesting. The elevator ride down with Rusk felt like escorting a man who'd just realized the museum world was less about culture and more about survival. His hands shook as he scribbled the check, and for a moment I wondered whether Wolfe would need a blotter or a mop. "Is this enough?" he asked, offering the check with both hands like tribute to a minor deity. "It'll get you through the door," I said. "Whether it gets you out alive is your own problem." He managed a weak smile, then hurried toward the street, keeping his portfolio clutched tight against his ribs as if the city might mug him for his secrets. I returned to the office. Wolfe had already left the plant rooms and settled into his office chair, eyes shut, fingertips touching. When Wolfe thinks, the entire brownstone feels like it quiets down out of respect. Even the radiator pipes stop their usual tapping as though waiting to be sentenced. I took my chair. "Well," I said, "that was a cheerful way to start the morning. Anything you'd like to add to the sunshine?" Wolfe opened one eye. "Archie, stop dancing around the relevant point." "Which one? That Rusk is lying? That Lila Harrow is probably dead? Or that the art world seems determined to drag us into another of their soap operas?" "All of them," Wolfe said, sitting up a fraction. For him, that constituted high emotion. "Begin typing." I rolled my chair to the typewriter. Wolfe's dictation was crisp and clinical, a record of Rusk's claims, the dagger's description, the suspect list, the connection to the midnight call. Every word was a piece of evidence pinned to the page like an insect in a museum drawer. When I finished, Wolfe rang for Fritz. Fritz appeared, as always, in silent glide mode, hands folded, face serene. "Yes, sir?" "Coffee for Mr. Goodwin," Wolfe said. "And eggs. I will take mine soft." Fritz nodded and vanished like a courteous ghost. Sometimes I wondered if he actually used doors or just materialized when needed. I looked at Wolfe. "You know, you're moving fast for a man who once refused to answer a telegram because it arrived too early in the day." Wolfe scowled. "Circumstances compel efficiency." That was Wolfe's version of admitting he was concerned. 10 minutes later, while I worked through my eggs and coffee, Wolfe stared at the ceiling again. I recognized the posture. He was rereading the entire situation inside his skull, rearranging pieces, discarding clutter, building his theory brick by brick. At 10:41, the phone rang. Wolfe gestured sharply, my cue. "Goodwin." Lon Cohen's voice crackled in with newsroom urgency. "Archie, tell Wolfe I ran a short piece this morning about the midnight call. Nothing big, just enough to stir interest. The Gazette's phones are blowing up." "I bet," I said. "You stir a pot that size, something's bound to bubble up." "One tip already," Lon said. "Somebody swears they saw Lila Harrow arguing with a man near the Bolden Club yesterday afternoon. No name, just a tall, angry type with a foreign coat, whatever that means." "That," I said, "means nothing until it means everything." "Pass it along," Lon said. "More coming." I hung up. Wolfe asked, "Well?" I gave him Lon's report. Wolfe closed his eyes. "A red herring, most likely, but file it." I typed a quick memo. If Wolfe dismissed a clue, it often meant he was storing it for later ammunition. At 10:58, the bell rang again. I went to answer, praying it wasn't another museum curator. Instead, Inspector Kramer stood there, trench coat open, cigar clamped between teeth, eyes set to procedural headache. "Wolfe in?" he asked. "He's seated," I said. "Which is his natural state." Kramer brushed past me with a grunt. "Wolfe, we've ID'd the body. It's her, Lila Harrow. And before you say it, no, we don't know the cause yet. She washed up too long." Wolfe exhaled. "Unfortunate." "Unfortunate is your word for it," Kramer said, removing the cigar long enough to jab the air. "She called you. That makes you part of this, whether you like it or not." Wolfe didn't flinch. "Inspector, I am already engaged." Kramer blinked. "Rusk hired you?" "Yes." Kramer scratched his jaw, the gesture halfway between annoyance and resigned acceptance. "Fine, but I want anything you get. Anything." "I will offer what the law obliges," Wolfe said smoothly. "No more." Kramer made a sound that could have been a laugh in a darker world. "That'll do, for now. But don't make me chase you. I'm tired, Wolfe." For a moment, the irritation in his eyes softened into something like respect. Then he put the cigar back between his teeth and strode out. I returned to Wolfe, friendly as ever. "He is doing his job," Wolfe said simply. "And we're doing ours?" Wolfe looked at me, and the weight of his gaze carried the entire case with it. "Archie," he said, "we have accepted a retainer. We are now responsible for discovering the truth." I nodded. "No turning back?" He reached for his beer glass, still cold, still half full, and took a measured sip. "No," he said, "no turning back." And just like that, the case was ours. The next morning, the drizzle made Midtown look like it had been shellacked in gilt, and at 9 a.m, that was saying something. I stepped out of the cab and took in the scene. Steam rising through sewer grates, the neon sign of a noodle joint flickering like it had the hiccups, and a payphone crouched against the wall as though it knew something terrible had happened there and was trying to hide from the memory. Saul Panzer leaned against the booth, hands in pockets, cap pulled low. If Saul ever broke a sweat, the city would declare it a natural disaster. "You beat me here," I said, walking up. "You sent the message late," Saul replied, and I was already downtown. Thought I'd take a look before tourists started treating the sidewalk like a public lounge. "Any sign of our mysterious soprano from last night?" Saul nodded toward the ground. A dark smear clung to the concrete, half washed by the rain, but unmistakably blood. "2 droplets here, one inside the booth. Fresh, and look at this." He held up a scrap of embroidered silk caught in the metal seam of the phone housing. Burnt orange thread, delicate pattern, expensive work. I took it carefully. It matched the style of women's scarves they sell in boutiques that specialize in draining bank accounts. I tucked it into an evidence envelope. If this belonged to a guy, he's more fashionable than me, and that's illegal in this part of town. A voice behind me said, "Some of us are fans of a bold colour." I turned. Jonas Quill, tall, polished, and oiled like a seal at feeding time. He had the kind of face that made you wonder how many lies it took to keep his smile from slipping off. Notebook in one hand, press card in the other. He looked thrilled. "Archie Goodwin," he said. "Didn't expect you to grace us with your presence so early." "Jonas," I said, "if you're here for the story, head to the Gazette. They've already made it up." He smirked. "Cohen's a hack. I actually research my work." "That's a choice," I said. Jonas turned to the booth. "So this is where Lila Harrow placed her final call. Fitting. She always said Manhattan would swallow her eventually." I didn't like how pleased he sounded about it. "How do you know it was her?" "She called me earlier yesterday," Jonas said, in that smooth tone of his that could have sold umbrellas in the Sahara. "Said she had a scandal brewing. Big, dangerous, profitable. Something involving collectors who prefer their acquisitions unburdened by legal provenance." Saul glanced at me, a silent nudge. More motive, more suspects. Before I could press him, someone barreled into the scene like a storm cloud with heels. Tamsin Vale. Shoulders squared, jaw trembling with fury, eyes red and sleepless. If grief had knuckles, she wore them raw. "You!" she spat at Jonas. "Get away from this!" Jonas stepped back, hands up. "Tamsin, don't." She rounded on me next. "Is it true? Is it her?" "We don't know yet," I said. "Clothing matches the description, but we'll wait for official word." Tamsin closed her eyes, breathing hard. "I told her not to come here alone. I told her this dagger, this damned relic would ruin her." At that, Jonas perked up. "Oh? You're confirming the dagger exists?" Tamsin glared. "Don't put words in my mouth, Quill." "Then let me borrow your mouth," Jonas replied, too smug for his own anatomy. "Lila said she found out something about the relic being a fraud. A fake. A forgery worth less than the paper trail surrounding it." Tamsin's expression cracked. That wasn't grief. That was panic. She masked it fast, but not fast enough for me to miss. "Lila didn't confide in you," she said bitterly. "She barely tolerated you." "Yet she called me," Jonas shot back. "Not the way she called Wolfe," I said. That shut them both up. The rain picked up, tapping the booth like impatient fingers. I decided it was time to do actual work. I flagged down a cab driver loitering near his vehicle, coffee in hand, eyes sharp. He'd been waiting for someone to talk to, and I was the lucky winner. "Morning," I said. "See anything last night? Around midnight?" He took a sip, shrugged, then froze as though something clicked in his memory. Lady, dark coat, burnt orange scarf, came running up looking like fear had her by the collar. Guy behind her, tall, shoved her. He gestured. Real rough. She fought back and went for the phone. I heard shouting, then they jerked out of sight. You get a look at the guy's face? I asked. No, just the scarf, bright orange, ugly thing. Looked like he stole it off a circus tent. Later that night, he added, another fella came by, thin, nervous, museum type. Looked like he was searching for someone. Tamsin stiffened. Jonas frowned. I filed it away. Witness impressions had more plot holes than Swiss cheese, but sometimes the holes mattered. I thanked the cabbie and sent him on his way. Saul crouched by the booth again. Archie, he said quietly, these fibres match that scrap. Good, I said. Or bad, depending on who wore the scarf. Speaking of, Saul murmured, tilting his chin at Tamsin, she looks like she's hiding something. I didn't answer. Not because he was wrong, Saul is never wrong, but because I spotted flashing lights at the end of the block. Stebbins, Kramer probably 2 steps behind. Fantastic. Stebbins approached first, wearing his usual expression of someone who'd been denied both breakfast and common courtesy. Goodwin, he growled, you better not have trampled the evidence. I held up my hands. Relax, Pearly. Saul's doing the heavy lifting. I'm just here for charm and ambience. Stebbins grumbled something unprintable, but he checked the booth and for once didn't bark at me. Maybe the drizzle softened him. Kramer arrived next, trenchcoat flapping, cigar clenched like it owed him money. He gave me a look that was halfway between suspicion and reluctant gratitude. Goodwin, he said. Thanks for keeping the scene intact. Inspector, I said. If I'd known you wanted it gift-wrapped, I'd have brought bows. Kramer ignored that. He leaned into the booth, studying the blood, the angle of the receiver, the scrap of silk. What do we know? I summarized the cabbie's story. Jonas tried to add commentary. Kramer shut him up with one raised hand. Saul stepped forward. Silk fibres. Torn, not cut. Likely from a struggle. Kramer grunted. We'll run them through the lab. Good work, Panzer. Saul nodded, humble as always. Then Kramer turned to me. Where's Wolfe? At home. Where else? You expecting him to take a stroll? Kramer sighed, shook his head and actually said, Tell him. Good call, not disturbing the scene. I blinked. You feeling all right? Don't push it, Goodwin. My phone buzzed. Wolfe. Archie, he said, voice tight. Do not put yourself in the bear's path. I'm only poking the cubs, I said. Archie. That one word carried the weight of a lecture, a warning, and a parental scowl combined. I hear you, I said. I'll behave. You will not, Wolfe said, but do it carefully. I hung up. Kramer raised an eyebrow. Your boss checking on you? He worries, I said lightly. I'm delicate. Saul snorted. As the police wrapped up, Tamsin approached me one last time. Her eyes were burning coals. That scarf, she whispered. It wasn't a man's. Whose then? I asked. She swallowed. Lila's. I bought it for her. She wore it every day. A twist, sharp and clean as broken glass. Not the attacker's scarf, Lila's, torn off her neck during the struggle. And suddenly the burnt orange thread didn't look like fashion anymore. It looked like murder. By the time the afternoon slunk into the brownstone like a cat avoiding blame, Wolfe had finished tormenting the orchids and planted himself in his office chair with the air of a monarch preparing for execution day. I'd seen Wolfe irritated, offended, burdened, disgusted, and bloated from overeating, but this was the expression he reserved for moments when the universe forced him to behave like a common detective. On my end, I wasn't thrilled either. Summoning 3 suspects at once into the office was the kind of tactical maneuver that would make a commando unit sweat. But Wolfe had decided it, which meant I was stuck with seating charts, timing, and the very real possibility of needing to dive across the room if someone decided to reenact a Shakespearean tragedy. My morning had been spent arranging chairs, 3 client chairs, evenly spaced, each polished enough to show the reflection of poor decisions. Wolfe had rung Saul Panzer earlier to ensure we weren't inviting an ambush. Saul had assured him the suspects had no immediate plans of violence. Then again, Saul also once assured me a man wouldn't punch me in an alley. My bruise disagreed. At precisely 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang with a strain of dignity that suggested the visitor believed himself royalty. That was Victor Baudreau. I opened the door to find him towering on the stoop, dressed in a coat expensive enough to cause moral dilemmas. The man smelled like imported arrogance and designer sin. Mr. Goodwin, he said with a curt nod, Nero Wolfe requests my presence. Summons, I corrected. You request doctors. Wolfe summons suspects. His jaw tightened. I am not a suspect. You're early, I said. That's suspicious on its own. I guided him inside before he could brain me with his briefcase. At 2:07, Tamsin Vale arrived, red-eyed but composed, wearing a coat that looked slept in and boots better suited to stomping dignity than mourning. She didn't greet me. She just brushed past, muttering to herself like a kettle about to boil over. At 2:11 came the final gift of the hour. Jonas Quill, notebook in hand, grin polished, shoes too shiny for any man with scruples. He tipped an imaginary hat at me. Archie, Wolfe ready for us? He's ready for something, I said. Whether it's you, we'll know in 10 minutes. I ushered all three into the office, and it immediately felt like trying to teach 3 cats how to share a bird. Boudreaux sat ramrod straight, hands folded like a dictator waiting for applause. Tamsin perched on the edge of her chair, bristling. Jonas relaxed theatrically, crossing one leg over the other as though auditioning for a scandalous profile shot. Wolfe observed them for a full 10 seconds before speaking. In Wolfe time, that's a lifetime. He used silence like a scalpel, light pressure to begin, then deeper, carving out the lies. Ladies and gentlemen, he said finally, I have summoned you because you each had dealings with Miss Lila Harrow shortly before her death. Boudreaux sniffed. Death is unfortunate. Business is business. Tamsin shot him a glare sharp enough to slice ivory. She wasn't business. She was... Her voice cracked and she bit it shut. Jonas leaned back, smirking. You'll forgive Tamsin, Mr. Wolfe. She and Lila believed in moral nuance. It rarely paid well. Wolfe ignored them. I will begin with Mr. Boudreaux. Boudreaux lifted his chin. I have nothing to hide. You attempted to buy the ceremonial dagger, Wolfe said. Boudreaux shifted fractionally. I made inquiries. That is all. Your inquiries, Wolfe said, included offering Miss Harrow twice the artifact's documented value. That proves nothing, Boudreaux huffed. It proves, Wolfe countered, that you were either ignorant or desperate, or both. Jonas snorted. Ignorant fits. Tamsin snapped. Shut your mouth, Jonas. Both of you, Wolfe said sharply. Cease. The room went still. Wolfe's gaze swept over them, cataloguing every twitch. Tamsin Vale, he said, you will explain your dispute with Miss Harrow. Her jaw clenched. We worked together. We were partners. She wanted to sell the dagger. I told her it wasn't safe, not with bidders like Boudreaux sniffing around. We argued, but I didn't kill her. Your side deal? Wolfe asked. Tamsin's face darkened. She thought she could go behind my back, meet a buyer alone. She thought she was in control. Jonas tapped his notebook. She told me she planned to expose certain collectors. You should talk to Rusk. Tamsin's head whipped toward him. You're lying. Jonas shrugged. She said she had a dossier, names, dates, evidence, enough to spark a scandal. Boudreaux snapped. She promised me an exclusive showing. She didn't mention any scandal. Wolfe raised a hand. Enough, Mr. Quill. Jonas leaned forward with false humility. I'm merely a journalist hoping to guide the public toward truth. I coughed. You'd guide the public into a river if the payout was right. Jonas smirked. I don't deny ambition. Miss Harrow contacted you, Wolfe said. Yes. She told me she'd uncovered something fraudulent, something dangerous. Fraudulent? Wolfe repeated. Jonas nodded. She said the dagger wasn't what everyone believed it to be, that someone forged the provenance. Tamsin inhaled sharply. Boudreaux stiffened. Wolfe saw all of it. After 5 more minutes of gentle needling, subtle traps, and silences so heavy they might have required steel reinforcement, Wolfe flicked the bell cord. Fritz, he said when our Swiss miracle appeared. Refreshments. Fritz nodded, silently assessing whether the suspects would stain the furniture. They might. Wolfe dismissed the trio. Leave your numbers with Mr. Goodwin. Do not leave the city. Boudreaux protested. Wolfe simply closed his eyes. Jonas produced a card. Tamsin stormed out first, grief radiating off her like heat. Once the door clicked shut, Wolfe exhaled. Archie, your impressions. Boudreaux smells like crime and cologne, I said. Tamsin's ready to punch someone. Jonas is Jonas, a charm offensive armed with a typewriter. Wolfe nodded. Adequate. That was Wolfe code for I agree. At 4:03 the phone rang. I answered. "Goodwin," Kramer grunted. "Put Wolfe on." I handed over the receiver. Wolfe listened silently, face impassive. When he hung up, he said, "The coroner reports Miss Harrow suffered a cranial blow before entering the water." "Murder confirmed," I said. "Kramer want a parade?" "He requests cooperation," Wolfe said dryly, "which we definitely won't give him." "Archie," Wolfe said sternly, "do not bait the inspector." "Who? Me?" He gave me the look usually reserved for garden slugs. 5 minutes later the mail arrived. Fritz carried in a small wrapped parcel. "For you, sir." Wolfe opened it. Inside lay a ceremonial sheath, ivory, inlaid, ornate, sinister, but empty. And that was when Wolfe murmured, "Archie, someone is playing a deeper game." He set the sheath on his desk like a challenge tossed onto a dueling table, and the office suddenly felt colder. If you've never watched Nero Wolfe examine an object he dislikes, imagine a king being handed a dead fish wrapped in velvet. That was the expression on his face as he turned the ornate ceremonial sheath over in his hands that morning, ivory inlays gleaming faintly, the filigree catching the office light like it had secrets to whisper. Wolfe hated secrets, especially ones that arrived by mail uninvited. The suspects had barely cleared our doorstep yesterday before the parcel came. Since then, the thing had occupied the corner of Wolfe's desk, like a guest refusing to take a hint. I sat opposite him, drinking coffee that Fritz had brewed with the solemnity of a religious rite. Wolfe rotated the sheath again, nostrils flaring ever so slightly. That detail alone was enough to raise alarms. Wolfe never sniffed anything unless it contained herbs, beef, or trouble. "Archie," he said at last, "this reeks." "Most murder weapons do," I offered. "I am referring," Wolfe snapped, "to the tobacco." "Oh?" I leaned forward. "Imported kind?" "Boudreaux's brand. The fool bathes in it." Wolfe flicked the sheath with a single finger. The scent lingers in the crevices. "Well," I said brightly, "we've solved it. Boudreaux did it, case closed. I'll tell Fritz to bring the victory soufflé." "Archie," Wolfe growled, "cease." He pressed a thumb along an engraved line and something clicked. A section of the sheath slid open, thin as a razor's whisper. Inside was a folded slip of paper, stained dark brown in one corner. Wolfe handed it to me with 2 fingers, the way you hand someone a fragile snake. "Read." I unfolded it. "Receipt from the Winston Secure Vault Company. Signed by Lila Harrow." I checked the timestamp. "Yesterday, 3 hours before her estimated time of death." Wolfe shut his eyes. "And the box's contents?" "Well, if the sheath is here," I said, "my guess is the dagger isn't reclining comfortably in bed." He sighed. "Archie, go." "Where?" "To the Vault Company." That ended the discussion. I grabbed my coat and headed out. Wolfe watched me go with the kind of expression a parent wears when sending their child to a very disappointing summer camp. It was his try not to get killed face. The Winston Secure Vault Company was located in a building that had once been a bank, then a newspaper office, then a speakeasy, then all 3 simultaneously if the rumors were true. Inside I found a clerk built like a question mark, thin, bent, anxious, and determined to appear useful. "Good afternoon," I said, flashing my best smile. "Archie Goodwin. I'm looking into an account belonging to Miss Lila Harrow." The clerk swallowed hard, eyes darting like I'd asked him to confess to all 7 deadly sins. "Miss Harrow, yes. She came in yesterday." "Terrified?" I prompted. He nodded vigorously. "Shaking. Said she thought she was being followed, kept muttering about breaking someone's rules." "Wolfe's?" I don't know. She just said she was violating the man's laws and that she hoped he'd forgive her." The clerk wrung his hands. "She emptied her box. It's empty now. We didn't check what she removed. Private client protocol." "Did she say who she gave it to?" "No. She left quickly, almost ran." That matched the timeline perfectly, and left us with nothing but a missing dagger and the echo of fear. I thanked him, got a photostat of the receipt, and headed back out into the Manhattan mess. Rain had begun again, a fine mist that coated everything in a film of grime and indecision. I was about to hail a cab when my phone rang. Kramer. "Goodwin," he barked. "Care to explain why you were at the Winston Vault Company without informing me?" "Inspector," I said cheerfully, "I go where the clues go, also where the coffee is strong. Cut the jokes. What did you find? For once, I said, I'm authorized to share a morsel. Miss Harrow accessed her vault yesterday afternoon. Box was empty when we checked today. That's it? Kramer snapped. That, I said, and fear. Plenty of fear. Kramer grunted, but it wasn't rage. More like reluctant gratitude disguised as constipation. Tell Wolfe his damned efficiency is noted. I'll embroider that for his pillow. Goodwin, Kramer warned, but without heat. Then he hung up. By the time I returned to the brownstone, the sky was bruised purple and Wolfe was seated behind his desk, tapping his fingers in a pattern that spelled either deep thought or a desire to strangle someone. I set the photostat in front of him. He scanned it, nostrils flaring again. So, she opened the box and took whatever was inside. The dagger, Wolfe murmured. Almost certainly. Almost certainly, I agreed, is still a few steps from certainly. Archie, he said, get Rusk. I made the call. Rusk arrived 20 minutes later, paler than skim milk and twice as watery. When he stepped into the office and saw the sheath lying on the desk, he froze. Is that? Yes, Wolfe said. Rusk swayed. But the dagger? Gone, I said, like common sense in Congress. Rusk clutched his portfolio like a life raft. Mr. Wolfe, I didn't know. Wolfe tensed. I'd seen him tense before, once when a chef insulted Fritz's herb butter technique, once when I accidentally used his orchid scissors to open mail. But this was different, a deeper disappointment. You shadowed her, Wolfe said. Rusk blinked. What? A taxi driver saw you near the payphone at the approximate time of her attack. Rusk jolted. I didn't. I followed her because I feared she was in danger. And you, Wolfe said coldly, withheld that from me. I didn't want to seem guilty. You have succeeded, Wolfe said, in seeming incompetent. Rusk flinched. I only wanted to help her, I swear. Wolfe rose, not much, but enough to feel like a mountain shifting. For a man who considered standing a criminal act, it was dramatic. Mr. Rusk, he said, voice low and lethal. I abhor being handled. You will not lie to me again, Archie. Yes, sir. Stand here. I stepped forward. Wolfe positioned himself slightly in front of me, blocking Rusk's frantic pacing. It took me a moment to register it. Wolfe was shielding me, subtly, silently, but unmistakably. Rusk stopped. I didn't hurt her. I didn't. Wolfe studied him. Your panic is genuine. Your judgment is not. I swear, Rusk whispered. I thought the dagger would expose someone dangerous, someone who'd kill to keep it hidden. Wolfe leaned back. We shall see. I escorted Rusk out, making sure he didn't faint on the stairs. When I returned, Wolfe had settled again, fingertips pressed together. You know, I said lightly, you stepped between us back there. Archie, Wolfe replied, do not be absurd. The man was flailing. He could have struck you unintentionally. That's almost sweet, I said, like milk, which, by the way, I'm allowed to drink twice per story. Phooey. Should I bring you beer? No, bring me silence. But his tone was softer than before. Outside, the rain thickened, and the brownstone felt like a fortress preparing for siege. And somewhere in Manhattan, a stolen dagger was being carried by someone who didn't want it found. The night the brick came through the window started peaceful enough, which should have been my first clue the universe was winding up for a punch. I was in the office typing up a memo Wolfe had dictated with all the warmth of a tax auditor, a dry, joyless document destined for the safe, outlining the current suspects and the still missing ceremonial dagger. Wolfe had just returned from his evening orchid session, which meant he was prickly, hungry, and unwilling to acknowledge any human experience that didn't involve petals, Latin, or beer. At 7:43 p.m., Fritz appeared in the doorway, announcing that dinner would be served in 17 minutes. Wolfe grunted in approval, which for him was practically a love ballad. I stretched, ready to retire the typewriter for the night, when it happened. A crash, sharp, violent, unmistakable, shattered the calm. Glass exploded inward in a glittering arc across the carpet. Something heavy thudded onto the floor, skidding to a stop against the leg of Wolfe's desk. I was out of my chair before the shards finished settling. "Archie!" Wolfe thundered. "Stay put!" I barked, already sprinting to the door. I tore down the hall, yanked the front door open and dashed onto the stoop. The street was dim but clear. A car peeled away from the curb a half-block down, tyres screaming like they were tattling on the driver. I bolted down the steps, but by the time I reached the sidewalk, the car was nothing but exhaust and bad manners. "Damn," I muttered.
I memorized the direction, westbound, but at that speed, the driver was probably halfway to Jersey by the time my shoes hit the pavement. I hurried back inside. Fritz stood frozen halfway down the hall, hands trembling ever so slightly. "Mr. Goodwin, are you hurt? Is Mr. Wolfe?" "We're both fine," I said. "The window isn't." We returned to the office. Wolfe remained seated, because of course he did, but his eyebrows were engaged in full mutiny. On the carpet lay a brick the size of a small ham. Wrapped around it was a cheap scrap of brown paper held in place by twine. A note was scrawled across it in thick black ink. "Stay out, or another body floats." "Well," I said, "someone's manners could use work." Wolfe's lips pressed together like someone had insulted his favorite orchid. "Fritz, leave the glass." "But, sir—" "Leave it," Wolfe repeated. "Mr. Goodwin will inspect." That was Wolfe's way of saying I'd be the one risking my fingers on murderous confetti. I crouched and lifted the brick carefully with a handkerchief. Heavy, industrial, not a random find from the gutter. Wolfe growled. "Evidence remains until examined." "You don't say." I examined the surface. It wasn't plain brick. A subtle sheen clung to the top edge. "Varnish." "What kind?" Wolfe asked. "The kind that doesn't come from Home Depot," I said. "Looks like the lacquer they use on art handling crates." Wolfe's eyes opened wider, not much, but enough to signal he was registering the connection. "So the sender wishes us to know he is within that world. Or he's a lousy painter." From behind us, Fritz murmured, "Should I call the police, sir?" "No," Wolfe said. "Yes," I said at the exact same time. Wolfe glared at me. I glared back. We held for 3 seconds before Wolfe exhaled a long, tortured sigh. "Very well," he muttered. "Call Inspector Kramer." I dialed. Kramer arrived 9 minutes later, record speed for a man who usually moves like the city owes him money. He came in with Stebbins, whose expression suggested he was chewing nails for dinner. "What the hell happened?" Kramer demanded, stomping into the office with the authority of a man claiming land. Wolfe gestured stiffly at the broken window. "We have been attacked." "No kidding," Kramer said around his cigar. He surveyed the glass, the brick, the note. "Somebody wants you spooked." "Success is limited," Wolfe replied. Stebbins crouched beside me as I held up the brick. "You touch this?" "With a hanky," I said, waving the cloth. "I'm reckless, not stupid." Stebbins grunted. "Varnish," he observed. Kramer squinted. "Varnish," I explained. "Matches the type used on high-end art crates, Lila Harrow's World." Kramer puffed on his cigar. "So your suspects are rattling the cage." "It appears," Wolfe said. "Someone is quite desperate." Kramer turned to him. "Wolfe, I don't say this often, but I'm concerned. The last thing I need is a dead detective added to my paperwork." Wolfe's brows twitched. "Your solicitude is noted." Stebbins, surprisingly, nodded. "We'll post outside tonight." Wolfe inclined his head, a gesture so rare Kramer blinked twice. "Your presence," Wolfe said, "is acceptable." I swear Kramer almost said thank you, but instead he grunted, "I'll station Stebbins. Don't go wandering. And Goodwin, don't tamper with anything without telling me." "Inspector," I said, "if I sneeze near it, I'll file a report." Kramer jabbed a finger at me. "That wasn't a joke, wasn't it?" He glared but left it alone. After he and Stebbins finished their sweep, they exited, leaving the front stoop under police guard. I shut the door and returned to the office. Wolfe was staring at the brick like it had insulted his ancestry. "We have become," Wolfe said, "a target. Again, I added. Archie, he said sharply, refrain from buffoonery. I require your wits intact. That's my wits you're scolding, not the buffoonery. He glared. I grinned. It was our favorite form of evening exercise. The phone rang. Wolfe jerked his chin at me. Goodwin. Saul Panzer, came the calmest voice in New York. Got your message about the varnish. I traced the supplier. Only 3 buyers in the last 6 months. One is a rogue storage outfit in Queens used by private collectors. Let me guess, I said. Baudreau is on the client list? Yes, Saul said. Under an alias, but his handwriting gave him away. Saul, I said, you'd make a terrifying kindergarten teacher. Possibly. A pause. There's more. The vault clerk you spoke to. He didn't show up to work today. NYPD just fished him out of a service alley behind his building. Same head injury as Lila Harrow. The air in the office froze. Damn, I whispered. Tell Wolfe, Saul said. I'm heading to the scene now. I hung up and relayed the information. For a moment, Wolfe didn't speak. He didn't blink. His eyes darkened the way they only do when something hits him deeper than he'll admit. Another body, another connection, another tightening of the noose. At last, he said, Archie, sit. I sat. We are now past intrigue, Wolfe said quietly. This is escalation. That brick was a warning, I said. Now we know why. Wolfe nodded once. Someone is removing loose ends. Miss Harrow, the vault clerk, and now us. Well, I said, if someone plans to remove us, they better bring a bigger brick. Archie, Wolfe said with surprising softness. Be cautious. I blinked. Wolfe rarely issued instructions with emotional content. He preferred his affection hidden under grumbles and outrage. I'm always cautious, I said. He snorted. You are not. He reached for the bell cord. Fritz appeared. Bring beer, Wolfe said, and ginger ale for Mr. Goodwin. Does ginger ale help with being targeted? I asked. No, but it helps me endure your remarks, Wolfe replied. Fritz returned with the tray. Wolfe lifted his beer, held it a breath longer than usual, then took a slow, deliberate sip. A ritual calm in a night full of chaos. As for me, I watched the broken window glint in the lamplight and thought about the car speeding away, the second body in an alley, and the varnish trail leading straight to our charming collector. Wolfe? I said. Yes, Archie. We're being pulled into something bigger. I am aware. And whoever's doing the pulling, I added, isn't finished. Wolfe lowered his glass. No, he said, they are not. And that was the moment I knew. The hunt had turned. The killer was no longer hiding. They were coming. If there's one thing I've learned working for Nero Wolfe, it's that any building described as a private storage facility for select clientele is really just a warehouse where rich people hide things that could get them divorced, arrested, or embalmed. The Queen's warehouse Saul led us to that morning fit the pattern perfectly. The place squatted at the end of an industrial lane, its windows cracked, its paint peeling like it owed money. The air smelled of old wood, metal shavings, and the kind of secrets that make lawyers wealthy. Saul, Ori, and I moved through the shadows like 3 flavors of trouble. Saul glided silently ahead, his flat cap pulled low, every step considered. Ori strutted behind him with too much confidence and not enough humility. As for me, I brought charm, pessimism, and a revolver, 3 tools no investigator should leave home without. Saul picked the side door with the ease of a man opening a stubborn jar of jam. The lock clicked. The door groaned open. We slipped inside. The interior greeted us with a forest of crates, tall, wide, labeled with aliases that fooled no one. B. Marlowe, T. Green, P. Sand, the kind of pseudonyms a third grader might pick if asked to disguise a stolen marble. Classy, I muttered. Ori snorted. Collectors think they're subtle. Saul lifted a hand for silence. A draft pressed through the building like a whisper of disapproval. Dust hung in the air, thick enough to carve shapes into. Our footsteps left soft trails behind us. This way, Saul murmured. He led us deeper, threading between crates stacked like skyscrapers for mice. The lights flickered overhead, thin, dying bulbs casting pale swaths of jaundiced glow. About 30 yards in, he pointed to a section of the wall where the wood paneling didn't match. Secret room, he said. Ori grinned. Finally, something fun. I nudged him. Try not to touch anything your fingerprints can embarrass later. Saul pressed on a lower panel. It clicked inward, revealing a hidden door. We slipped through into a room that felt like the backstage of a black market opera, dim, cramped, shadow-drenched, and far too familiar with illegal ambition. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle around a central podium, the kind used at high-end auctions. On the podium lay a velvet cloth, empty now, but recently used. The air smelled faintly of burnt match heads and expensive desperation. I swept my flashlight across the floor. Fibers sparkled in the beam, thin, soft, burnt orange threads caught on a crate edge. Lila's scarf, I said quietly. She was here. Saul crouched, lifting a few fibers. Match the ones from the payphone, he murmured. Same dye, same weave. Ori exhaled a low whistle. So she came here before calling Wolfe. And she didn't leave through the front door of life, I said. My flashlight beam caught something on the wall, an enlarged photograph pinned crookedly under attack. I walked over. It was the dagger. Whole, gleaming, unmistakably the blade at the center of this circus. Lila had photographed it, probably here, on that podium, in this illicit auction chamber. The details were sharp. The bone-white handle, the darkened blade, the ornate engraving down its center, 2 interlocked serpents. I blinked. Well, I said, that's interesting. Saul joined me. He leaned in. Same symbol used by that mountain monastery. The one known for producing decoy blades, I said. Great. We've got a priceless relic worthy of murder, unless the whole thing is fake and not worth a postage stamp. Ori frowned. So Lila figured out the dagger's a forgery. Looks that way, Saul said. And someone killed her to hide it, I added. Because nothing says rational decision-making like committing murder to conceal the fact your expensive artifact is actually a cereal box prize. Ori scowled. Who'd kill over a fake? I gestured around the room. Ori. Collectors kill over authenticity, rarity, and ego. You think Baudreau would let the world know he shelled out a fortune for a forgery? He'd sooner drown himself in cologne. Saul moved to a small metal bin in the corner. Inside lay the charred remains of a journal page. He lifted it out with 2 fingers. Half-burned writing clung to it, like reluctant witnesses. I read aloud. Payment received. VB, Ori swore. Victor Baudreau. Saul frowned. Look at the handwriting. I did. Then I groaned. Jonas Quill. Ori blinked. You're sure? Positive. Jonas slants his lowercase e's like he's afraid they'll escape. So, we had Lila discovering a forgery, photographing it, preparing evidence, being stalked by at least one of 3 suspects, and keeping notes implicating both Baudreau and Jonas. Great, I said. All we need now is Rusk's initials carved into the wall. Saul stood. We should call Wolfe. Not yet, I said. Let's finish looking around before the cavalry arrives, interrupted a familiar voice. Kramer stepped into the doorway, Stebbins behind him. Kramer looked exhausted, eyes red, shoulders sagging, but not angry. That was concerning on its own. Kramer without rage is like Wolfe without beer, unnatural and ominous. "Inspector," I greeted. "Fancy meeting you in this illegal emporium of questionable taste." Kramer glared. "You idiots crawl into more crime scenes than police do. Next case, I'm handcuffing you to Wolfe's desk." "Wouldn't be the first time," I said, "though last time the cuffs were unnecessary. Wolfe's inertia is stronger than iron." Kramer pinched the bridge of his nose. "Saul called me. He's at least sane enough to let law enforcement know when he finds a dead body's breadcrumbs." Stebbins surveyed the room, unimpressed. "Whole place smells like stolen property." "Good nose," I said. "You missed your calling as a bloodhound." He grunted. "Watch it, Goodwin." Kramer studied the photograph of the dagger. "This the real one? Or the fake one?" I said. "Take your pick." Kramer sighed. "Wolfe's going to make this hell." I grinned. "Glad you admit he's involved." "I didn't say glad." He jabbed a thumb toward the door. "You get 10 more minutes, then I'm sealing this place." "Generous," I said. "Don't thank me," Kramer snapped. "You three are annoyingly competent." Coming from him, it was like receiving the Medal of Honor. We used the 10 minutes well. I photographed everything with my pocket camera. Fibers, the photograph, the burned journal scrap, the podium, the crates, the aliases. Ori tried prying open a locked cabinet until Stebbins coughed meaningfully and he stopped. When Kramer herded us out, we obeyed, for once. As we stepped into the sunlight, if you can call the smog-glazed Queen Sky sunlight, Saul spoke quietly. "Archie, this room ties everything together. Or unties it," I said. "Depends on how many knots the killer left." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair. Fingers steepled, eyes closed. He didn't open them when I entered. He simply said, "Report." I launched into it. Everything. The warehouse, the hidden auction room, the burnt orange fibers, the photograph of the dagger, the serpent's engraving, the journal scrap, the handwriting, the forgery theory, the monastery connection, Kramer's temporary truce, the 10-minute grace period. Wolfe listened without interrupting, a feat equivalent to teaching a boulder to dance. When I finished, he inhaled deeply, then opened his eyes. "The imposture deepens," he said. "That's one way to put it," I replied. "Another is, we're swimming in lies and someone tied bricks to our ankles." Wolfe nodded. "Sit, Archie." I sat. "Someone is killing," Wolfe said, "to hide a truth that should be harmless. That paradox is intolerable." "Paradox?" I asked. "A forgery," Wolfe murmured, "is embarrassing, not fatal, yet someone treats it as a threat." "Meaning what?" "Meaning," Wolfe said softly, "the forgery may not be the problem." He leaned back. "But the truth behind the forgery is." And suddenly, I felt the room tighten. Because when Wolfe speaks like that, quiet, thoughtful, grave, it means the mountain is preparing to move, and when the mountain moves, someone's world breaks open. If Nero Wolfe ever opened a theater, I'd bet my last necktie every performance would begin with, "All right, Archie, bring in the next fool." The man didn't need curtains, spotlights, or ushers. He had silence, timing, and a glare that could make professional liars forget their names. That evening, the brownstone became his stage. It began at 6:02 p.m., 12 minutes after Wolfe declared orchid hours finished, and Fritz declared dinner still too distant for comfort. Wolfe sat in his oversized throne behind the desk, eyes half-lidded, fingers steepled, looking like an emperor contemplating which subject required the least effort to execute. I stood at my station by the door, notebook ready, tie freshly tightened for intimidation or decoration. I was never sure which Wolfe wanted. "Archie," Wolfe said, "fetch Mr. Beaudreau first." "From where?" I asked. "He's not on the front porch." "He will be," Wolfe replied coolly. "I sent telegrams." "And you didn't tell me?" He groaned. "Archie, must you seek perpetual validation for being informed?" "You mean, must I ask basic questions to do my job?" "Precisely." I grinned. "You're lucky I like you." He opened one eye. "I am reasonably aware." At 6:05, the doorbell rang. Right on schedule. I answered it to find Victor Beaudreau standing like a man auditioning for the role of wronged aristocrat number 3. He wore a silk scarf loud enough to qualify for its own passport. "Mr. Goodwin," he greeted stiffly. "Wolfe expects me." "He summons you," I corrected. "This way." I led him inside but did not take him to the office. Per Wolfe's instructions, I parked him in the front room, a cozy parlor we rarely used, but perfect for psychological marination. It had just the right acoustics for muffled suspicion. "You'll wait here," I said. "For how long?" "Depends on how truthful you plan to be." His nostrils flared. I shut the door and returned to Wolfe. "Beaudreau is stewing," I reported. Wolfe nodded. "Bring him." I escorted Beaudreau in. Wolfe didn't rise. He didn't smile. He simply gestured to the client chair. "Sit." Beaudreau sat. Wolfe opened with, "You knew the dagger might be counterfeit." Beaudreau stiffened, like I'd zapped him. What? No!" Wolfe closed his eyes. "Sir, do not insult me." Beaudreau faltered. "The rumors existed, yes, but I attempted to purchase it anyway." Wolfe finished. "Why?" "Because," Beaudreau said in a low voice, "even a counterfeit tied to that monastery carries value. Historical, symbolic, financial," Wolfe supplied. Beaudreau scowled. "Fine, financial." Wolfe waved a hand. "Dismissed." "What? Already?" "Mr. Goodwin will escort you upstairs. You will wait." When I guided him to the elevator, shoved him in gently, and sent him to the second-floor guest room with instructions not to leave unless murder, fire, or dinner occurred. Next, at 6:22,
Tamsin Vale arrived, a storm cloud in boots. I ushered her into the front parlour exactly as I had Beaudreau. When she entered the office, Wolfe didn't waste a second. "You forged documents," he said. Her mouth dropped open. "What? How?" "Your reaction is admission," Wolfe observed. "But I prefer articulation." She sank into the chair. "Fine. Yes, I forged the provenance file. Only parts, to boost the dagger's value." Lila agreed at first. Then she changed. She said truth mattered more. "Did she ever intend to expose you?" "I don't know. Maybe." She was angry. Wolfe asked nothing more. "Goodwin." I escorted Tamsin upstairs and locked her in the second guest room. At 6:41, Jonas Quill rang the bell. He arrived with his trademark half-smile, the expression of a man who believed the world owed him applause merely for breathing. "Archie," he greeted, "I brought my notebook." "Great," I said. "You can write about how badly this will go for you." Into the parlour he went. When he entered the office, Wolfe opened with surgical precision. "You knew," Wolfe said, "about the hidden compartment in the sheath." Jonas froze. Well, Wolfe's gaze sharpened. "How?" Jonas hesitated too long. "Lila showed me," he lied badly. Wolfe growled. "Miss Harrow did not reveal that compartment to anyone but the one who killed her, and the one who tore open her scarf." Jonas sweated. Look, I didn't kill her. I swear it. I only knew about the compartment because Rusk mentioned—" "Rusk," Wolfe echoed sharply. Jonas floundered. "He might have guessed. He talks too much." Wolfe frowned deeply. "Goodwin." Upstairs Jonas went, sweating enough to water Wolfe's orchids. At 7:04 Rusk arrived, frazzled, jittery, smelling of stale guilt. As soon as he sat, Wolfe asked, Did you fear Lila would ruin you? Rusk stammered. I feared she would expose something inaccurate. You knowingly authenticated a forgery, Wolfe said simply. Rusk sagged. Yes, I did. But only because someone threatened me. Who? Wolfe asked. Rusk's eyes darted. I can't. Then do not attempt to enlist me, Wolfe snapped. You withheld your pursuit of her the night she died. You concealed your awareness of the forgery. You lied. I did it to protect her, Rusk cried. Archie, remove him. I escorted Rusk upstairs. Now all suspects were sequestered. The brownstone felt like a pressure cooker preparing for a very legal explosion. Wolfe called, Archie. I returned to the office. He actually regarded me, with something almost gentle. Your transitions between interviewees were performed with not intolerable elegance. I put a hand to my heart. Be still, my soul. Wolfe complimented me. Archie, Wolfe said, must you ruin everything with levity? Must I? Yes. The phone rang. Kramer, I answered. Goodwin. Wolfe, he barked. Put him on. Wolfe took the phone, listened, said only, understood. He hung up. Autopsy update, I guessed? Yes. Miss Harrow had ink on her fingertips, the same ink as the burned journal scrap. She handled it, fought someone for it. Wolfe nodded, which means the killer handled it too. And Jonas knew about the compartment, I said. Only Lila and her killer would know that. Possibly, Wolfe murmured. Possibly not. He leaned back. Silence thickened. Then Wolfe inhaled, deep and final. We have enough. I blinked. Enough to? He opened his eyes. They gleamed like a hawk spotting a trembling mouse. Prepare the office, he said. Tonight, we conclude. That was when I knew the curtain was about to rise on Wolfe's final act, the one no liar could escape alive. The brownstone office has seen its share of theatrics, shaken suspects, red-faced district attorneys, thieves pretending to be patrons of the arts. But that evening it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. Maybe it was the lamplight glinting off the shattered window we still hadn't repaired, or maybe it was the way Fritz hovered in the doorway before retreating, leaving the atmosphere thick as tension in a jury room. But mostly, it was Wolfe. When Nero Wolfe decides he's going to announce the truth, the universe either stands back or faints. I opened the front door at precisely 8 o'clock p.m. to find Victor Baudreau glaring like he'd been summoned to the gallows. Behind him lurked Tamsin Vale, jaw tight, eyes dull from too little sleep and too many fears. Rusk followed, pale as skim milk, clutching his portfolio like a life-preserver. And last, Jonas Quill sauntered in with that insufferable half-grin. He gave me a nod that said he still believed he could charm his way out of hell. Evening, folks, I said. Let's try not to ruin the rug. Fritz charges double for blood. Baudreau sneered. Tamsin didn't blink. Rusk looked like he might faint. And Jonas flashed me a smile meant for magazine covers. I escorted them to the office where Stebbins stood by the door, arms crossed, jaw locked. Kramer sat in a client chair off to the side, cigar unlit but clenched like he intended to throttle someone with it. Wolfe sat behind the desk, composed, immovable, and glowering as if patience were a finite resource and the room was overdrawing from his account. Sit, Wolfe commanded. They sat. I took my post near Wolfe's left shoulder, close enough to intervene, far enough to dodge any flying furniture. Wolfe began without ceremony, his voice deep and controlled. You are here because the investigation is concluded. Jonas raised an eyebrow. Already? My column hasn't even... Be silent, Wolfe said calmly. Jonas wilted a little. Wolfe continued. We will address each of you in turn. Mr. Baudreau, you sought the dagger, whether authentic or counterfeit. You pursued it with the desperation of a collector protecting his investments. Baudreau sputtered. I never harmed. I did not say you did, Wolfe said, eyes closed in irritation. But your ambition, your proximity, and your willingness to intimidate made you relevant. Kramer grunted approval. Tamsin Vale, Wolfe went on, you forged documentation to elevate the dagger's value. You involved Miss Harrow in your scheme. When she began reconsidering, you feared exposure. Tamsin clenched her fists. I never laid a hand on her. I swear it. Wolfe nodded once. Correct. You did not. She sagged in relief. Daniel Rusk, Wolfe said, turning his attention to the curator. You authenticated the dagger, while knowing it was fraudulent. Rusk trembled. I was threatened. Yes, Wolfe said, and managed poorly. Kramer made a note in his pocketbook. And finally, Wolfe said, folding his hands, Jonas Quill. Jonas flashed a grin. Before you launch into your monologue, Wolfe, let me remind everyone that I am a faithful servant of the truth. My writing is a phooey, Wolfe snapped, the real version, the one he saved for special occasions. Jonas shut up. Wolfe leaned forward. You are not a servant of truth. You are its peddler. You commodify secrets, scandal, and lives. And you engineered this one. Jonas blinked. You're accusing me? Yes, Wolfe said. You murdered Lila Harrow. Tamsin gasped. Boduaro cursed. Rusk whimpered. Stebbins straightened like a man preparing to handcuff a tornado. Jonas laughed. Actually laughed. You're bluffing, Wolfe. You need readers. Wolfe's glare could have melted steel. I do not bluff. You killed Miss Harrow because she discovered your journal forgery. You wrote fictitious entries implicating Baudreau. Baudreau exploded. What? Silence, Wolfe thundered. Archie. I stepped forward. Baudreau sat. Wolfe continued. You forged the entries to sell them as part of an exposé, but Miss Harrow found the real dagger's engraving, the interlocked serpents. She realized the blade was counterfeit and that you were using the forgery to generate scandal for profit. Jonas's smile faltered. She threatened to expose you, Wolfe said. You followed her. You shoved her at the payphone. You ripped her scarf. Burnt orange threads were found here, at the warehouse, on the payphone booth, and beneath her fingernails. You hit her with the brick later thrown through my window. You dumped her body in the river. The room froze. Jonas swallowed. There's no proof. Anyone could... No, Wolfe said. Only you knew of the hidden compartment in the sheath. Only you forged the journal entries. Only you had ink-stained fingertips matching those found on Miss Harrow's hands. She fought you for the journal page. You fled, leaving fragments behind. Then you mailed the sheath to me, hoping to implicate another while slowing my inquiry. Kramer sat forward. His eyes narrowed. Wolfe gestured. Archie. I stepped behind Jonas just as he lunged toward the door. Stebbins moved faster, credit where due, snatching Jonas's arm and twisting it behind him. Jonas shrieked, more offended than injured. Kramer rose. Jonas Quill, he said, voice grim but calm. You're under arrest for the murders of Lila Harrow and Stephen Boyd, the vault clerk. Jonas spat. This is absurd. Wolfe is lying. Goodwin planted evidence. You can't... Kramer jabbed a finger at him. Shut up. If Wolfe wanted to lie about you, you'd never see it coming. He isn't lying. Stebbins cuffed Jonas, whose bravado melted faster than butter on Fritz's skillet. Tamsin slumped in her chair, horror replacing rage. Baudreau's face had turned a lovely shade of storm cloud. Rusk looked ready to apologize to every religious object he'd ever mishandled. Kramer pocketed the cuff's key. He turned to Wolfe and did something rare. He nodded, a real nod, respectful, heavy, tired. You nailed it, Wolfe. Wolfe didn't smile, but something softened in his eyes. Inspector. Stebbins hauled Jonas toward the door, Jonas shouting indignation that fooled no one. Kramer followed, calling over his shoulder, Send me your report in the morning, and Wolfe, don't ever get attacked by a brick again. Paperwork's a nightmare. When the door shut, silence swelled like a slow tide. Wolfe looked at Rusk. The fee. Rusk blinked. What? You retained me, Wolfe said. A fee is due. Rusk fumbled for his checkbook. And Mr. Rusk, Wolfe added, if you ever falsify provenance again, I will refuse your existence. Rusk nodded so violently his glasses nearly fell off. He thrust a check toward me with shaking hands. I placed it on Wolfe's desk. Tamsin rose unsteadily. Wolfe, I didn't know. I didn't know Jonas was... Wolfe waved a dismissive hand. You knew enough to regret. Baudreau stood, chin high. I will reconsider my dealings. See that you do, Wolfe said. Good night, Mr. Baudreau. One by one they drifted out, confessed, chastened, stunned. When the door finally clicked shut, I let out a long whistle. That, I said, was one hell of a performance. Wolfe grunted. I detest theatrics. Then why are you so good at them? He glared, but it lacked venom. Archie, bring me beer. A celebratory beer or a recovery beer? Both. I fetched Fritz. He arrived with the tray, a frosted glass for Wolfe, ginger ale for me. Wolfe lifted the beer. To conclusion, he said. And to justice, I added. He snorted. Justice is an illusion. Then, I said, raising my ginger ale, to Wolfe's version. It works better anyway. He almost smiled. Almost. And that, coming from Nero Wolfe, was damn near a standing ovation. By the time the dust settled on Jonas Quill's arrest, the brownstone felt like a man who'd been to the barber, the tailor, and confession all in one afternoon, lighter, cleaner, and suspiciously relieved. The debris from the broken window was gone. Fritz had reclaimed the rug from the indignities of crime, and Wolfe had resumed his natural posture of regal disdain for anything that smelled like effort. Which meant, of course, I was left typing up reports while he contemplated the ceiling as though it contained the secrets of the universe, and possibly a recipe for a better herb sauce. It was 7:42 p.m., 18 minutes before dinner, and Wolfe was doing what he called thinking and what I called strategic napping with attitude. He sat behind his desk, eyes half closed, fingers steepled, inhaling faint traces of orchids as if they were moral support. I was 3 pages into summarizing Quill's motives when Wolfe suddenly shifted. "Archie," he said. "Yes, sir." "Cease that incessant tapping." "It's called typing." "It is called irritation by percussion." I grinned. "You know, most bosses like employees who file reports before the ink dries." "Most bosses," Wolfe said, "are Philistines." I returned to my typewriter, making sure my keystroke sounded like gentle applause. Wolfe scowled, but without venom. At 7:50, Fritz appeared, leaning lightly into the doorway. "Dinner will be ready in 10 minutes, gentlemen." "Thank you, Fritz," Wolfe said with genuine warmth, one of the few luxuries he allowed himself. After he left, Wolfe exhaled deeply, the sound of a man releasing the last of a bad taste. The office finally felt like home again, not a battlefield, not a crime scene, not a landing pad for bricks with threatening notes. "You know," I said casually, "if you don't mind my saying, you broke at least 4 of your personal rules this week." Wolfe opened his eyes. "Enumerate." "Well," I said, pleased to oblige, "first you came down from the orchids early. That's practically sacrilege in this temple. You also summoned suspects during an active investigation. Then you admitted concern for my safety. Not very subtle, by the way. And finally, you tolerated Kramer without marking the calendar in red." Wolfe's brows knit. "Archie, I broke only the rules that required breaking." I had no idea there were situational exceptions. "There are not," he growled. "There are necessities." I leaned back, hands behind my head. "I'll take that as an admission you're mellowing." He shot me a look reserved for pests found near his orchids. At precisely 8 o'clock, Fritz returned to announce dinner. We migrated to the dining room, Wolfe with slow dignity, me with the weary satisfaction of a man who'd chased suspects through warehouses, dodged bricks, and resisted throttling 3 art collectors in 1 week. Dinner was roast chicken with herbs, glazed carrots, and a wine sauce that made Wolfe close his eyes in reverence. After everything the past few days had thrown at us, seeing Wolfe enjoy his meal without interruption was almost enough to make me sentimental. Almost. Halfway through dessert, pear tart with citrus glaze, the phone rang. "I'll get it," I said, rising. Wolfe waved a fork. "Return promptly." I answered. "Goodwin." "Tell Wolfe it's Kramer," came the gravelly voice. I hesitated, expecting irritation, but Kramer actually sounded, if not cheerful, then significantly less murderous. "1 moment." I returned to the dining room and handed Wolfe the receiver. He wiped his fingers fastidiously and pressed the phone to his ear. "Yes, Inspector." Kramer's voice was muffled, but from Wolfe's reactions I could piece it together. "The dagger," Wolfe repeated. "Fake, as expected. Historically interesting? Ha! Its danger lay not in its blade, but in its illusion." He listened again, then surprisingly nodded. "Yes, your cooperation was appreciated as well." I blinked. Wolfe didn't compliment police officers lightly, or at all. He hung up and pushed the phone aside. "Well?" I asked. "The dagger is counterfeit," Wolfe said, "but of considerable historical curiosity. The monastery produced several ceremonial imitations for internal rites. Harmless." "Harmless," I echoed, "except for the 2 murders, the brick ambush, the window replacement bill, And my dry cleaning tab. Wolfe lifted his brows. Your sartorial expenses are not admissible in this discussion. Tell that to my suit, I said, brushing dried varnish from the cuff. Wolfe lifted his beer, which Fritz had poured into the chilled glass at exactly 8:12, and took a long, slow sip. The tension melted from his shoulders as though the beer itself were performing a massage. Archie, he said finally, your impetuosity did not, on this occasion, ruin us. I stared. Is that a compliment? It is an observation. Its interpretation is your affair. I'll take it as a compliment, I said, because someone had to. He snorted softly, a sound dangerously close to fondness. We returned to the office after dinner. The window had been boarded temporarily until a glazier could replace the pane. Stebbins, following Kramer's orders, still kept watch outside, though I suspected he was really lingering for the chance to overhear Fritz's dessert plans. Wolfe sank into his chair, tugged the bell cord, and demanded coffee. Fritz arrived promptly. "Shall I bring ginger ale for Mr. Goodwin?" Fritz asked. "Yes," Wolfe answered before I could. "Archie has earned a beverage that is not milk." "I only drink milk occasionally," I protested, "twice per story at most." "Phooey," Wolfe murmured. As Fritz left, I settled into my chair and stretched. The office glowed with lamplight, shadows curling against the bookshelves, the air rich with the smell of coffee, beeswax, and the faint trace of orchid pollen Wolfe always carried down from the plant rooms. This whole mess, I said, started with a phone call and ended with a forgery so flimsy it couldn't even hold its own reputation together. "Precisely," Wolfe said. "Value is a fragile thing, easily bent. And truth," I added, "apparently even easier." Wolfe closed his eyes, thinking. "Truth is immutable. What distorts it are men, ambitious, fearful, avaricious. Jonas Quill murdered not for truth, but for the illusion of possessing it." I couldn't argue. Jonas had nearly escaped justice on the strength of charm and ink, but Wolfe's mind had been sharper and deadlier than any forged blade. "So what was the rule that really broke?" I asked. Wolfe opened one eye. "Rule?" "You broke several," I reminded him, "but which one mattered?" "None," he said. "Only one was bent." "Which?" His gaze drifted to me, steady, unreadable, but warmer than a lamp's glow. "I trusted you," Wolfe said softly, "to act where I could not. Necessary, but nonetheless a deviation from my preferences." I went still. Wolfe didn't hand out that kind of sentiment like street flyers. "Archie," he added abruptly, "do not make more of it than it warrants." "Too late," I said lightly, because if the atmosphere got any more sincere, I'd have to retire from the NYPD's unofficial sarcasm corps. He grunted, tugged the bell cord again, and demanded more beer. Fritz delivered. I raised my ginger ale. "To breaking rules," I toasted. Wolfe lifted his glass. "To enforcing them." We clinked, ginger ale to beer, and sat quietly as the night deepened outside the cracked window. Manhattan hummed. Sirens in the distance, cars passing. Somewhere, someone was already planning their next scandal, next deception, next treasure hunt. But here, in the brownstone, order had reasserted itself. Wolfe had solved another case without leaving his chair. I had chased killers, dodged bricks, dragged suspects through elevators, and survived Kramer's temper. And Fritz had fed us through it all, proving once again he was the true backbone of civilization. I leaned back and looked at Wolfe. "In this town," I said, "treasures come and go, fakes masquerade as fortunes, and truth plays hide-and-seek. But one thing stays solid, your rules." Wolfe grunted, unimpressed. "And if a case makes you break one," I added, smirking, "well, you can bet it was worth watching." Wolfe didn't speak, but he didn't disagree, which, coming from him, was practically poetry.